In today's episode, we jump into the most horrifying animal attacks in the United States. From a swimmer who turned into shark food, to a kid who was swallowed whole by a large, hungry python. August 15, 2012 dawned bright and clear in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with temperatures in the comfortable mid-70s and a gentle breeze that made it perfect for outdoor activities. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Mesa Ridge Trail system, creating ideal conditions for what should have been a peaceful family run. Paul Reyes was a 45-year-old high school history teacher who had made fitness a cornerstone of his life. Known throughout Roosevelt High School for his passionate lectures about local New Mexico history, Paul was the kind of teacher students remembered long after graduation. Always greeting students in the hallway and always full of energy whenever you see him. As a single father raising 2 children, he often used his morning runs as both exercise and meditation time. That particular Saturday morning held special significance for the Reyes family. Paul's sister Natalie had flown in from Phoenix for a rare weekend visit, and his 14-year-old daughter Isabel, an aspiring track athlete, had eagerly joined them for what was meant to be a bonding experience, combining family time with fitness. What the Reyes family didn't know was that 8 miles away, a crisis had been developing at the Wilderness Safari Park. The facility had been operating under increasingly tight financial constraints and had been cited multiple times by state inspectors for maintenance issues and staffing shortages. In the morning, a perfect storm of circumstances aligned. The weekend skeleton crew was operating with only 2 staff members instead of the required 4, and a temporary employee unfamiliar with the facility's protocols was handling the morning feeding routine. The African lion enclosure housed a 380-pound male named Aslan. The temporary employee had failed to properly engage the secondary locking mechanism on the enclosure's feeding chute. Aslan discovered the weakness and managed to force the partially secured gate open. The escape went unnoticed for approximately 45 minutes. African lions are apex predators capable of reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. Their powerful jaws can exert a bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, and their retractable claws can grow up to 1.5 inches long. Even captive-born lions retain their hunting instincts and territorial behavior. Males like Aslan can weigh between 330 and 550 pounds and measure up to 10 feet in length, including their tail. As the family approached a bend in the trail where dense brush created natural blind spots, one of his daughters, Isabel, ran slightly ahead. The morning was so perfect that none of them noticed the unusual silence. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals. The encounter came suddenly. Paul, whose years of outdoor experience had taught him to pay attention to environmental cues, noticed the unnatural quiet just moments before Aslan emerged from the brush. The lion's appearance wasn't an explosive ambush, but rather the cautious emergence of an animal as surprised by the encounter as the humans were. Paul's body reacted in a blink of an eye. He pushed Isabel backward with such force that she stumbled and fell several feet away from the immediate danger. His actions likely saved his daughter's life, but positioned him as the primary threat in Aslan's perception. The attack unfolded with terrifying speed and precision. Aslan launched himself at Paul with explosive power, covering 12 feet in a single bound. The 380-pound lion struck Paul's chest with devastating force, driving him backward onto the trail. Before Paul could recover, Aslan's massive jaws clamped down on his neck with surgical precision, the 4-inch canine teeth penetrating deep into soft tissue. The lion's bite force began crushing Paul's trachea, while his powerful head-shaking motion caused catastrophic damage to the cervical vertebrae, sending waves of blood across the morning trail. Isabel's screams pierced the morning air as she watched her father disappear beneath the massive predator. Natalie, Paul's other daughter, overcoming her initial shock, immediately called 911 while applying pressure to Paul's wounds with her jacket after the lion retreated. Her quick thinking and basic first aid knowledge helped slow the bleeding during the critical minutes before help arrived. Emergency response reached the scene 28 minutes after Natalie's call. Paul remained conscious during initial treatment, but his condition deteriorated rapidly during transport. He died during emergency surgery at University of New Mexico Hospital, approximately 4 hours after the attack. The investigation revealed a pattern of regulatory violations and financial mismanagement. The facility's operating license was immediately suspended, and criminal charges were filed against the park's management. The case became a catalyst for comprehensive reform, leading to Paul's Law, which established mandatory staffing levels and required redundant security systems for dangerous animal enclosures. It was September 14, 2017, under the harsh New Mexico sun outside Ruidoso Down, at a makeshift sanctuary behind rusted gates. The sounds of children's laughter would soon be replaced by screams as Nina, a 200-pound black jaguar, shattered the illusion of safety that Tyler Qualls had carefully constructed. Tyler was a 46-year-old retired Army medic who had returned from 2 tours in Iraq with shattered nerves and a deep mistrust of civilization. His father's death had left him 6 acres of desert land, which he gradually turned into what he called the micro-sanctuary. The property housed 2 bobcats, a few rescued reptiles, and Nina, the jaguar he considered the crown jewel of his operation. Tyler had purchased Nina from a Texas breeder 2 years earlier, paying in cash and transporting her across state lines in a modified horse trailer. He often said his military background gave him intuitive respect for apex predators, claiming he didn't need formal training. He ran the place alone. No staff, no protocols, no emergency barriers. He rejected tranquilizers and carried no firearm. His solution to danger was confidence, which he believed animals could sense. Once a month, Tyler hosted open house days, low-key events advertised through local forums and word of mouth. Visitors were allowed close-up views of the animals from behind standard chain-link fences. Tyler would lead casual tours barefoot, speaking about natural balance, trust, and how fear is what gets people hurt. His self-printed brochures mentioned animal welfare but omitted any legal disclaimers or real warnings. On the morning of September 14th, 11 visitors arrived, including a couple from Albuquerque with 2 children, a tourist group from Arizona, and 3 local residents. By 10 a.m., they had gathered near Nina's enclosure, a 20 by 30 foot space enclosed by chain-link fencing and shaded by a salvaged metal carport. The guests took photos as Tyler talked about Nina's diet, daily behavior, and his belief that she saw him as family. Unbeknownst to the guests, Nina had been showing troubling behavior for several days. Tyler's veterinarian friend, who occasionally stopped by to check the animals, had warned him the jaguar might be entering pre-estrus, a hormonal phase where big cats become more territorial, aggressive, and unpredictable. Tyler brushed it off, saying that she's moody, not dangerous. But wild behavior doesn't disappear in captivity. Captive jaguars retain the same instincts as their wild counterparts, and pre-estrus only amplifies their sensitivity to any perceived intrusion or competition. By 10:30 a.m., Tyler decided to demonstrate his bond with Nina. With a bucket of raw chicken in one hand, he unlatched the enclosure gate and stepped inside, barefoot as always. He waved off concerns from guests, saying that Nina knows him. He turned his back to pour food into the trough, and that's when it happened. Nina had been crouched behind a boulder near the enclosure's rear wall. Her posture was low, ears flat, eyes locked on her target. She didn't growl, she didn't snarl, she lunged. 200 pounds of muscular predator closed the 10-foot distance in a second. Her claws struck first, tearing through Tyler's side and spinning him off balance. Her jaws clamped down on his lower back, targeting the pelvis. A loud crack echoed through the enclosure, his spine fracturing under the bite force. Tyler collapsed, screaming, legs motionless. Nina didn't hesitate. She gripped his limp body and dragged it behind the boulder. Blood stained the sand as she disappeared from view. The guests outside froze. One woman screamed. A man fumbled for his phone. But no one could enter the enclosure. There was no secondary gate, no lockout zone, no way to intervene. The 911 call came at 10:34 a.m. The dispatcher recorded multiple overlapping voices, most describing a man being dragged and mauled by a large black cat. Emergency responders arrived at 10:52 a.m. They found Nina crouched over Tyler's body, her muzzle red, her ears forward, posture stiff. She stood as the officers approached the gate, displaying classic defensive behavior. When she stepped forward baring her teeth, she was shot twice through the head with a .308 caliber rifle. Inside the enclosure, the scene was gruesome. Tyler's skull had been crushed, likely from a single bite by Nina's canines. Deep puncture wounds marked his back and legs, and his torso showed signs of feeding behavior. Claw marks stretched from his hip to his ribs. The ground beneath him was soaked in blood. The investigation determined that Tyler died within minutes of the initial attack. The spinal injury had paralyzed him instantly, and blood loss from multiple arterial wounds proved fatal. There was no sign of disease in Nina, no sedatives or stimulants, no evidence of provocation. She had simply acted on instinct. The enclosure met minimum state requirements but had no redundancy. It had blind spots, no reinforced barrier between the animal and caretaker, and no emergency plan in place. Authorities concluded that the attack was preventable, not because Nina behaved unnaturally, but because Tyler had ignored basic safety measures. Tyler's remains were cremated. His sister, a schoolteacher from Las Cruces, organized a small service attended by a few of Tyler's former Army colleagues. The ceremony was held at a veteran center with a photo of Tyler in uniform placed next to a folded American flag. No one spoke publicly about the Jaguar. Within a month, the sanctuary was disbanded. The 2 bobcats were relocated to a licensed wildlife center in Colorado. The fencing was taken down, the structures dismantled, and the land put up for sale. State officials closed the investigation quietly. No charges were filed, since Tyler had not technically violated any enforceable statute. New Mexico had no comprehensive regulation on big cat ownership at the time. In the end, the state labeled the event an isolated incident. The morning of April 12, 2013 brought typical spring conditions to the waters 8 miles west of Farallon Islands, California. The water was characteristically cold for Northern California, hovering around 58 degrees Fahrenheit with moderate swells rolling in from the northwest. For most recreational divers, these conditions would be challenging. But for the Navy diving unit conducting training exercises in the area, it was just another day at the office. Sergeant Daniel Walsh, 26, checked his equipment one final time as he prepared for what should have been a routine underwater navigation exercise. Daniel's 3 years of Navy diving experience included over 150 training dives in locations ranging from the warm, clear waters of the Caribbean to the frigid, murky conditions of the North Atlantic. He had participated in ship hull inspections, underwater construction projects, and search and recovery operations that tested both his technical skills and his ability to work effectively under extreme stress. His dive logs read like a catalog of challenging conditions and successful missions. His colleagues respected his technical skills and his ability to remain calm under pressure, qualities that have made him a natural leader among the younger divers in his unit. The underwater navigation exercise planned for that April morning was considered routine by Navy standards. The exercise was being conducted in an area regularly used for Navy training, chosen for its consistent depth and relatively predictable conditions. What the training unit didn't know was that the area had recently become a feeding ground for elephant seals, massive marine mammals that were in the midst of their annual migration along the California coast. These seals created exactly the kind of marine activity that attracted the region's apex predators. Great white sharks in this region are among the largest and most aggressive of their species, with some individuals reaching lengths of over 20 feet and weights exceeding 5,000 pounds. Their hunting strategy typically involves attacking from below with explosive force, often launching their massive bodies completely out of the water. At 9:45 a.m., Daniel began his descent for the navigation exercise, following standard procedures that had been refined through years of military diving operations. His primary air supply was functioning normally, and his backup regulator had been tested according to protocol. 25 minutes into the dive, Daniel's primary regulator began delivering inconsistent airflow, a potentially dangerous malfunction that required immediate attention. The regulator malfunction, while not immediately life-threatening, forced Daniel to surface earlier than planned and in a location approximately 200 yards from his designated pickup point. More critically, he surfaced in an area where elephant seals had been feeding intensively for several days. Daniel broke the surface and immediately activated his emergency beacon, following protocols designed to alert his support team to his location and condition. But Daniel was now floating alone in an area where great white sharks had been actively hunting, and his presence at the surface made him vulnerable to the kind of attack that had made these waters notorious among marine biologists. And one great white had been watching Daniel, likely a mature female estimated at over 18 feet in length based on the size of the bite radius later measured by investigators. The shark had probably been hunting in the area for days, attracted by the elephant seal activity, and Daniel's sudden appearance at the surface triggered the predatory response that millions of years of evolution had perfected. Daniel was floating on his back, checking his equipment and waiting for pickup when a great white shark struck him. The attack came from directly below, the classic hunting pattern of a great white shark pursuing what it perceived as a wounded seal. Daniel had no warning before the massive predator struck, its powerful jaws clamping down on his torso with a force that could crush a small boat. The shark's 300 serrated teeth penetrated deep into Daniel's chest and abdomen. The force of the attack launched both Daniel and the shark partially out of the water, a behavior known as breaching that great whites exhibit when attacking seals and sea lions. Daniel's emergency beacon continued transmitting throughout the attack, providing his rescue team with precise coordinates even as the horrific scene unfolded. The rescue team arrived approximately 8 minutes later but saw no signs of Daniel in the location. An extensive search and rescue effort was announced. Unfortunately, Daniel's body was recovered 40 minutes later by Coast Guard divers, who found him on the bottom in 65 feet of water. Daniel's death led to significant changes in military diving protocols, including mandatory marine wildlife briefings before all training operations and improved coordination with marine biology monitoring services. The Navy also implemented enhanced communication systems that provide real-time information about marine mammal activity in training areas, helping to prevent similar tragedies in the future. It was March 15, 2013, when the tranquil silence of Cape Coral's canal system was shattered by a scream that would haunt neighbors for years to come. Across the water, a resident heard a sharp, panicked cry cut through the air from Joyce Weller's dock, a sound that ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only ripples on the water and a growing sense that something had gone very wrong. Joyce was a 66-year-old retired schoolteacher who had moved to Cape Coral 3 years earlier, seeking the peaceful retirement that had eluded her during 4 decades in Florida's overcrowded classrooms. Her modest canal-side home offered everything she had dreamed of: spectacular sunrises, elegant egrets perched on her seawall, and the slow, meditative pace she had earned after years of managing unruly students. A lifelong bachelor who preferred solitude to social obligations, Joyce had found her sanctuary in the waterfront living. Joyce's fatal mistake began innocently enough. The previous summer, she had noticed a small alligator, perhaps 4 feet long, occasionally cruising through her canal. She began tossing kitchen scraps into the water from what she considered a safe distance. She named the young gator Benny, and delighted in telling neighbors how he seemed to recognize her morning routine, appearing at her dock like clockwork for his daily meal. However, Joyce failed to understand the predator living just beyond her seawall. American alligators can grow over 14 feet long, crush bone with nearly 3,000 pounds of bite force, and adapt their behavior through repeated human contact. When fed, they lose their fear and begin to associate people with food, turning from wary animals into bold, dangerous threats. Over the months that followed, Benny grew, both in size and boldness. What Joyce interpreted as friendly recognition was actually dangerous conditioning. Each feeding session taught the alligator that humans meant food, gradually eroding the natural wariness that keeps wild alligators at a safe distance from people. By spring 2013, Benny had transformed from a cautious 4-foot juvenile into an 8-foot predator that had learned to associate Joyce's presence with feeding time. The morning of March 15th began like countless others. Joyce emerged from her house carrying a plastic bowl filled with leftover chicken and vegetables. Her usual offering for the gator she had come to consider a pet. She settled at the edge of her dock, legs dangling over the water as she'd done dozens of times before, completely unaware that she was about to become prey rather than provider. What Joyce couldn't see was that months of conditioning had fundamentally altered Benny's behavior. The alligator no longer approached her dock with the cautious curiosity of a wild animal. Instead, he had learned to position himself directly beneath the feeding spot, waiting with the patient focus of an apex predator. His 8-foot frame, now weighing close to 400 pounds, possessed the explosive power to launch his entire body out of the water in a feeding strike. The attack came from directly below with devastating precision. Witnesses from across the canal described a violent eruption of water as Benny launched himself upward, his massive jaws clamping onto Joyce's dangling foot with bone-crushing force. The impact was so powerful that it lifted her partially off the dock before dragging her into the canal in one fluid motion. She had no time to scream again, no opportunity to fight back against a predator that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds. Desperate scratch marks gouged into the weathered wood of the dock told the story of Joyce's final moments, her fingernails clawing frantically for purchase as the alligator's death roll began. The rotational force generated by an adult alligator's death roll can exceed 1,000 pounds, easily breaking bones and causing fatal internal injuries. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, immediately called by her neighbor that saw the attack, they found only Joyce's empty sandal floating near the dock, an overturned plastic bowl that had contained her final offering to Benny, and the telltale drag marks that revealed the tragedy's violent conclusion. Search teams located Joyce's body hours later, pinned against a concrete weir nearly half a mile downstream. The autopsy revealed drowning as the primary cause of death, though the traumatic injuries to her leg indicated she had likely lost consciousness from blood loss and shock before succumbing to the water. Wildlife officials captured Benny that evening using baited treble hooks and chicken, the same food Joyce had used to condition him for months. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, Benny was euthanized. The incident triggered a brief but intense local campaign for stricter canal patrols and enhanced warning signage about alligator feeding. Florida law had long prohibited feeding alligators, with penalties including fines up to $500 and potential jail time. But enforcement remained inconsistent in residential areas. Joyce Weller was buried 4 days later at Coral Ridge Cemetery in a closed casket service. Fewer than 30 people attended, mostly neighbors and relatives, with no formal eulogy given. It was June 2nd, 2015. the air heavy in Calhoun as string lights glowed softly over a quiet backyard gathering. Neighbors and former students mingled around folding tables laden with potato salad and sweet tea, unaware that their host, Trish Bolin, was about to lead them toward a tragedy that would unfold in seconds but haunt them forever. Trish was a 53-year-old former high school science teacher who had channeled her grief over her husband's death 6 years earlier into an obsession with primatology. Her modest ranch home had become an unofficial educational center where she hosted library lectures and property tours centered around her prized possession, Rafi, a 400-pound male silverback gorilla she had acquired through questionable permit loopholes in 2009. Trish had convinced herself that Rafi, hand-raised from infancy, possessed human-level empathy and could be controlled through modified sign language and routine care. She dismissed the warnings of friends who noticed his increasingly aggressive behavior, the object throwing, the territorial charging, the refusal to respond to commands. These were classic signs of a mature male gorilla asserting dominance, behaviors that in the wild would establish his position within the troop hierarchy, and she was blind to it. The custom-built outbuilding where Rafi lived featured steel framing and double doors, but Trish's deadly flaw was her belief that barriers were unnecessary between her and her roommate. She routinely entered his enclosure without protective barriers, a practice that violated every USDA recommendation for primate handling. Her confidence in their bond had blinded her to the fundamental truth that gorillas, regardless of their upbringing, remain wild animals with instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution. That evening, as the cookout wound down, Trish offered her guests a tour they would never forget. 8 people followed her across the backyard to meet Rafi, who stood silently behind the mesh door, his dark eyes tracking their movement. What they witnessed next would shatter any illusions about the gentle nature of captive primates. Trish entered the enclosure carrying a crate of ripe peaches, Rafi's favorite treat. She attempted to demonstrate their communication through sign language, but Rafi remained unresponsive, a warning sign she chose to ignore. Then, in a moment of fatal overconfidence, she reached toward him to show his tactile trust. The primate took this differently. Adult male gorillas are 10 times stronger than humans, with 8-foot arm spans and the ability to lift over 4,000 pounds. Though not naturally aggressive, a single blow can shatter ribs, and their 1,300 psi bite can crush a skull instantly. In an instant, Rafi struck her across the chest with a single open-handed blow that sent her crashing to the floor. Before she could recover, he advanced, the dominant male asserting his authority. His 400-pound frame came down on her torso with crushing force, each step breaking ribs and collapsing organs. The horror escalated as Rafi grabbed Trish by the jaw, his massive hands easily encompassing her head. With one powerful bite, he removed part of her face. His canine teeth, designed to strip bark and crush tough vegetation, tearing through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. The guests fled in panic, their screams echoing across the suburban neighborhood as they witnessed the brutal reality of primate power. A neighbor that heard their screams dialed 911. When law enforcement arrived 12 minutes later, they found Rafi standing motionless over Trish's body. Not aggressive, but alert, displaying the calm dominance of a silverback who had successfully defended his territory. Unaware that a dangerous animal was present, they waited for another 10 minutes for animal control to arrive. Eventually, a tranquilizer dart ended the standoff, but it was far too late for Trish. Her skull was crushed, her upper torso torn open by the immense force of Rafi's attack. The scattered peaches around her body served as a grim reminder of the trust she had placed in a creature whose nature she had fundamentally misunderstood. Rafi was euthanized the following morning, a decision made without protest or petition. Trish's family declined interviews and only a small obituary appeared in the local paper, noting her background as an educator and longtime advocate for primate care. The investigation revealed multiple violations dating back years. Incomplete behavior logs, improper enclosure procedures, and lack of veterinary oversight. The property was sold, the outbuilding demolished, leaving only bureaucratic footnotes to mark the end of Trish Boland's misguided dream. The evening of October 15, 2016 brought perfect conditions to the Pacific Ocean, 85 miles off the coast of Monterey Bay, California. A gentle breeze carried the salt air across calm seas, while the full moon cast a silver pathway across the water's surface. For most passengers aboard the luxury cruise liner, it was the kind of romantic evening that made anniversary celebrations unforgettable. Elena Rodriguez, 34, stood on the balcony of her 7th-deck suite, mesmerized by the moonlit ocean stretching endlessly in all directions. Elena worked as an accountant in Phoenix, a meticulous professional who approached everything in her life with careful planning and attention to detail. Her husband often joked that she could balance a checkbook blindfolded and organize a filing system that would make librarians weep with joy. She was also a recreational swimmer who had competed in high school, though she hadn't been in serious training for years. Her love for the water had drawn her to this Pacific cruise, a 7-day journey she and her husband had booked to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. The couple had saved for 2 years to afford the balcony suite, splurging on the luxury they rarely allowed themselves. Elena's husband, Miguel, was a construction foreman whose weathered hands told the story of decades spent building homes for other families. He was practical where Elena was romantic, cautious where she was spontaneous. At 2:15 a.m., while Miguel slept peacefully inside their cabin, Elena stepped onto the balcony to capture photos of the moonlit ocean. She leaned against the railing to get the perfect angle for a selfie with the moonlit ocean behind her. She stretched further than she should have, trying to capture both herself and the magnificent seascape in one frame. The ship hit a moderate swell at exactly the wrong moment. Elena, leaning far over the railing with her phone extended, lost her balance as the deck tilted unexpectedly beneath her feet. Her free hand grasped desperately for the railing, but momentum and gravity had already taken control. Miguel woke to the sound of Elena's scream cutting through the night air, followed by the terrible silence that told him something was catastrophically wrong. Miguel rushed to the balcony to find it empty, Elena's sandals still sitting where she had kicked them off earlier. His emergency call brought the ship's crew running within 90 seconds. But maritime safety protocols meant the massive vessel couldn't simply stop and turn around. The ship's engines went into full reverse while the captain initiated man-overboard procedures. But it took 12 agonizing minutes for the 900-foot vessel to halt its forward momentum and begin turning back toward Elena's position. Elena's 70-foot fall into the Pacific knocked her unconscious immediately, but she survived the impact. The 62-degree water was a shock to her system even through her pajamas, and she remained conscious briefly as hypothermia began setting in. Disoriented and injured from the fall, she struggled to stay afloat in the moderate swells, her cries for help lost in the vast darkness surrounding the distant lights of the cruise ship. When the rescue boats finally reached the GPS coordinates marking Elena's fall location, they found blood in the water and fragments of her torn pajamas floating on the surface. The area where Elena had fallen was within the Red Triangle, a notorious region off the California coast where great white sharks congregate to hunt seals and sea lions. The blood from Elena's impact injuries, likely a broken nose and lacerations from hitting the water, had attracted a predator from the depths below. The great white sharks of California's coast are apex predators that have ruled these waters for millions of years. Weighing up to 5,000 pounds and measuring over 20 feet in length, they possess sensory systems so advanced they can detect a single drop of blood from miles away. Their 300 serrated teeth, arranged in multiple rows that continuously regenerate, can tear through flesh and bone with surgical precision. When hunting, they often strike from below with explosive force, their attacks so sudden that prey has no time to react or escape. Elena, weakened by her injuries and struggling with hypothermia, had been floating helplessly when the great white struck from below. The attack was swift and decisive. The massive predator's jaws clamped down on her torso, and she disappeared beneath the surface without another sound. The shark, likely mistaking the injured and struggling woman for a wounded seal, had responded to millions of years of evolutionary programming. Elena's body was never recovered from the Pacific's depths. The Coast Guard continued searching for 2 days, but the vast ocean had claimed her completely. Miguel returned to Phoenix a broken man, carrying only the memories of their 10 years together and the crushing weight of what-if scenarios that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The cruise line implemented enhanced balcony safety barriers and mandatory safety briefings about the dangers of leaning over railings. But for Miguel, these changes came too late to matter. May 23, 2019 brought perfect weather to Lake Louise, Alberta, with clear skies, temperatures in the pleasant mid-60s, and the kind of crisp mountain air that made the Canadian Rockies a world-renowned destination. Jenna Morales was a 24-year-old nursing graduate from Vancouver whose adventurous spirit had carried her through 4 challenging years of medical training. Known among her classmates for her infectious optimism and ability to find humor during stressful clinical rotations, Jenna had a natural gift for making people feel comfortable and cared for. The camping trip to Banff and Lake Louise had been planned for months as a celebration of their graduation from the University of British Columbia's nursing program. Jenna and her 4 closest friends had dreamed of this adventure during late-night study sessions and grueling hospital shifts. What they couldn't control were the actions of other campers. 2 sites away, a family from Calgary had set up camp with troubling disregard for wildlife safety rules. Throughout the day, they had left food scraps around their fire pit, improperly disposed of meat containers, and left a cooler partially open outside their tent overnight. The situation was complicated by broader environmental factors. The previous winter had been unusually harsh, followed by a late spring that delayed the emergence of many grizzly bears' natural food sources. Berries were weeks behind schedule, and salmon runs were significantly reduced due to drought conditions upstream. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds. They possess incredible strength, capable of flipping over 700-pound boulders and running at speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. Their sense of smell is 7 times stronger than a bloodhound's, allowing them to detect food sources from over 18 miles away. When natural food becomes scarce, bears become food conditioned and lose their natural fear of humans, making them extremely dangerous. A large male weighing approximately 650 pounds, known to park researchers as Bear 211, had previously shown normal avoidance behavior around humans, but the combination of food stress and artificial attractants had begun altering his behavior patterns. As dusk settled over the campground, Jenna excused herself to walk to the communal water station to wash up before settling in for the evening. The station was only about 100 yards from their campsite, well within the designated safe area and clearly marked with emergency call boxes. Unknown to the campers, Bear 211 had entered the campground 20 minutes earlier, drawn by the scent trails from the improperly stored food. He had spent several minutes investigating the Calgary family's area, consuming food scraps and becoming increasingly bold. His presence had caused the natural wildlife in the area to fall silent and seek shelter. By the time Jenna was walking back to her camp, Bear 211 detected Jenna's movement on the path. Jenna spotted the grizzly 30 feet away from her. The massive bear rose up on its hind legs to assess this potential threat, standing nearly 9 feet tall. Then suddenly, Bear 211 dropped to all fours and charged with explosive and terrifying speed. The bear launched himself forward with devastating acceleration, his 650-pound frame thundering across the campground path at 35 miles per hour. The impact when he reached Jenna was catastrophic. His massive paw struck her chest with sledgehammer force, lifting her completely off her feet and sending her flying backward. As she hit the ground with shattered ribs, the bear's powerful jaws clamped down on her shoulder, his 2-inch teeth grinding against bone as he began the characteristic head-shaking motion that grizzlies use to subdue prey. Park rangers received the emergency call and dispatched a response team, but the remote location meant a response time of nearly 12 minutes, far too long to save Jenna's life. By the time rangers arrived, Bear 211 had dragged Jenna approximately 50 yards into the forest and had begun feeding behavior. The rangers were forced to use lethal force to end the attack. The Calgary family faced criminal charges under the National Parks Act for improper food storage. The incident prompted comprehensive review of wildlife management policies implemented gradually over 18 months, including enhanced enforcement and increased fines for violations. It was May 22, 2016, light filtering through the pines above Oakhurst as guests gathered behind Mario DeLuca's cabin for cake and quiet celebration. No one noticed the massive black shape in the tree line, until Mario, spotting it with a grin, raised his phone and remarked that it would make a great photo, words that would be among his last. Mario was a 61-year-old retired chef who had traded the chaos of Modesto restaurant kitchens for what he called simple living close to nature on his wooded parcel near Yosemite. However, his dream of harmony with the wilderness had manifested in the most dangerous way possible, through his relationship with Bobo, a 400-pound black bear he had raised from a cub and allowed to roam freely around his property. Mario's approach to bear management was built on dangerous misconceptions that would prove fatal. He believed Bobo was practically vegetarian, feeding him fruit, bread, and even beer while allowing the massive predator to wander freely between his property and the surrounding wilderness. This habituation, the process by which wild animals lose their natural fear of humans, is one of the most dangerous scenarios in wildlife management. Habituated bears become unpredictable, viewing humans as sources of food rather than threats to avoid. Additionally, despite their seemingly docile reputation, black bears are incredibly powerful omnivores capable of running 30 miles per hour and climbing trees with ease. Their massive paws are equipped with claws up to 4 inches long, designed for tearing apart logs and digging through soil, but equally effective at shredding human flesh. An adult black bear possesses the strength to crush a human skull with a single swipe and can deliver a bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch, enough to crack bones like twigs. Wildlife officers have received multiple complaints about Bobo's presence near residential areas, but Mario's insistence that his bear was harmless had prevented any serious intervention. He regularly boasted to neighbors about their special bond, describing how Bobo would visit his porch and even accompany him to the mailbox. These interactions, which Mario saw as proof of their friendship, were actually warning signs of a wild animal that had lost its natural behavioral boundaries. On May 18th, Mario's birthday celebration seemed like the perfect opportunity to showcase his unique relationship with Bobo. As his 3 guests, an old co-worker, her sister, and a local handyman, enjoyed cake and conversation, the massive bear wandered into view with the casual confidence of an animal that had learned to associate humans with food rewards. Mario's decision to approach Bobo with a slice of birthday cake represented the culmination of years of dangerous conditioning. Bears are opportunistic feeders with an acute sense of smell that can detect food from miles away, and Mario's offering of sweet cake activated the same feeding response that drives bears to raid garbage cans and break into campsites. Only this time, the bear wasn't separated by a fence or fear. Bobo reared onto his hind legs before lashing out with one massive paw. The blow struck Mario across the face, sending him sprawling backward as his guests watched in frozen horror. Black bears killed through a combination of crushing bites and powerful claw strikes. using their incredible strength to overpower prey much larger than themselves. Bobo's jaws clamped down on Mario's leg, dragging him toward the tree line with the methodical efficiency of a predator, securing its kill. The bear's subsequent attacks targeted Mario's abdomen and chest, tearing through flesh and bone. The 911 call came at 4:34 p.m. from a passerby who heard the screams echoing across the ridge. By the time deputies and wildlife officers arrived 30 minutes later, Mario was already dead, his body torn apart by the animal he had considered family. A single rifle shot ended both the attack and Bobo's life, but the damage was irreversible. Mario's torso had been torn open, his neck partially severed, his face rendered unrecognizable by the bear's powerful claws. The trail of blood and clothing fragments, stretching from the party table to the forest edge, told the story of his final, desperate moments. Mario's funeral was held 3 days later at a small crematorium in Mariposa. Only close family and a few former co-workers attended. In the days that followed, wildlife authorities conducted a formal investigation and issued a public advisory on the dangers of habituating wild animals. The bear's remains were tested and buried off-site, and the county announced plans to review and strengthen local exotic and nuisance wildlife enforcement protocols. The morning of June 3, 2015 brought ideal conditions to Jupiter, Florida's famous shark diving grounds. Crystal clear water stretched endlessly beneath a brilliant blue sky, with visibility extending to over 100 feet in every direction. For Jessica Chen, 31, preparing her gear on the dive boat's deck, it looked like another perfect day to share her passion for sharks with a group of eager underwater adventurers. Jessica embodied the kind of calm confidence that made nervous divers feel safe and experienced ones respect her expertise. With 8 years as a PADI-certified dive instructor and over 300 shark dives under her belt, she had earned a reputation as one of South Florida's most knowledgeable and safety-conscious dive professionals. Her colleagues at Jupiter Dive Center often joked that Jessica could read shark behavior like others read books, understanding the subtle body language and environmental cues that indicated whether an encounter would be peaceful or potentially dangerous. Jessica's approach to shark diving was methodical and educational. Regular clients requested Jessica specifically, knowing that her dives combined safety with incredible wildlife viewing opportunities. The group Jessica was leading that morning consisted of 6 experienced divers, all with advanced certifications and previous shark diving experience. They had specifically requested a tiger shark encounter, hoping to observe the large predators that frequented Jupiter's waters during the summer months. Jessica had explained during the pre-dive briefing that they were diving at a known tiger shark feeding aggregation site, where the predators gathered to hunt in the nutrient-rich waters where the Gulf Stream met the continental shelf. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most formidable predators, second only to great whites in terms of documented attacks on humans. These massive animals can grow to over 16 feet in length and weigh more than 1,400 pounds, with distinctive dark stripes that fade as they mature. Unlike many shark species that have specific dietary preferences, tiger sharks are opportunistic feeders, earning them the nickname wastebasket of the sea for their willingness to eat almost anything. At 11:45 a.m., Jessica led her group down to the sandy bottom 60 feet below the surface. The dive site was a known tiger shark aggregation area where the predators gathered to hunt in the nutrient-rich waters created by the convergence of different current systems. The water was exceptionally clear, offering perfect visibility for observing and photographing the magnificent creatures they hoped to encounter. Within minutes of reaching the bottom, Jessica spotted what they had come to see. A massive female tiger shark, easily 12 feet long, gliding through the water with the effortless grace that made these predators so mesmerizing to watch. The shark appeared calm and curious, displaying the typical behavior Jessica had observed in hundreds of previous encounters. She signaled to her group to maintain their standard distance of 15 feet, using hand signals to indicate they should remain stationary and allow the shark to approach if it chose to do so. What Jessica couldn't have anticipated was the presence of a large, injured fish struggling near the bottom just outside her field of view. A wounded barracuda, likely injured by another predator earlier that morning, was creating exactly the kind of distress signals that trigger feeding responses in tiger sharks. The shark's demeanor changed instantly when it detected the wounded fish. Its movements became more focused and aggressive, its body language shifting from curious investigation to active hunting mode. Jessica immediately signaled for her group to move away from the area, but the shark was already committed to investigating the source of the distress signals. In its heightened predatory state, the massive tiger shark perceived Jessica's position between herself and the wounded fish as a potential threat to its feeding opportunity. The animal's response was swift and devastating. The attack was sudden and overwhelming. The tiger shark covered the distance between itself and Jessica in seconds, its powerful tail propelling its massive body forward with explosive speed. Jessica had no time to react before the shark's jaws clamped down on her torso, the serrated teeth designed for cutting through tough prey penetrating deep into her chest and abdomen. The shark's powerful neck muscles engaged, shaking Jessica violently in the classic predatory behavior that tiger sharks use to subdue their prey. Jessica's dive buddy, positioned just 20 feet away, immediately signaled distress and began swimming toward the attack. The other divers, witnessing the horrific scene unfolding before them, followed emergency protocols Jessica had drilled into them during countless safety briefings. They formed a protective circle and began making noise by banging on their tanks, a technique designed to discourage further aggressive behavior from the shark. The tiger shark released Jessica after approximately 8 seconds of violent shaking. The massive predator, having delivered what it perceived as a defensive response to protect its feeding opportunity, swam toward the wounded barracuda, leaving Jessica floating motionless in the water. Her dive buddy reached Jessica first. She was unconscious and bleeding severely from the massive wounds to her torso, but she still had a weak pulse. The group began a controlled emergency ascent, following decompression protocols even in their panic, knowing that a rapid ascent could cause additional life-threatening complications. Breaking the surface, the divers immediately called for the dive boat while beginning rescue breathing and first aid procedures. Jessica remained unconscious throughout the 8-minute boat ride back to shore, her dive buddy maintaining rescue breathing while other divers applied pressure to her wounds in a desperate attempt to control the massive bleeding. Despite the quick response of her dive team and the immediate medical attention she received upon reaching shore, Jessica Chen died from massive trauma and blood loss before she could be transported to a hospital. Jessica's death led to significant changes in shark diving operations throughout South Florida. New protocols were implemented requiring dive guides to scan for wounded or distressed marine life before beginning shark encounters, enhanced pre-dive briefings about predatory behavior triggers, and improved emergency response equipment on all dive boats. It was May 7, 2016, the Florida sun casting long shadows across the Valencia Greens golf course as Glenn Perro made his final walk. The 72-year-old widower from upstate New York had moved to the villages 9 months earlier, seeking the peace and sunshine that had eluded him after his wife's passing. What he found instead was his own tragic end in the murky waters of a retention pond. Glenn was known throughout his neighborhood as a friendly but stubborn man who had little patience for what he called Florida rules. His evening walks had become routine, shortcuts through the golf course rather than the designated cart paths, dismissive waves at maintenance staff who warned him about wildlife, and a general disdain for the yellow caution tape and warning signs that sprout like weeds after every rainstorm. That evening, recent rainfall had caused the retention pond near the 8th hole to overflow, creating the perfect conditions for an alligator to venture beyond its usual territory. The standing water mixed with runoff containing fish waste and organic matter would have attracted the predator's attention. It was a recipe for something to go horribly wrong. Spring in Florida marks the beginning of alligator mating season, when males become increasingly territorial and aggressive, expanding their range in search of mates and new hunting grounds. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their bite force measures an astounding 2,980 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a turtle shell or snap a human femur like a twig. Glenn stepped over the barrier chain and yellow caution tape at 7:15 p.m., picked up by security footage around the area. His shoes splashed through the ankle-deep floodwater as he took the shortcut, completely unaware that he was being watched. A greenskeeper loading tools onto his maintenance car spotted Glenn across the flooded area. He was about to call out a warning when something near the grass line caught his attention. A shape that had been perfectly still, now drifting slightly with the current. The 10-foot male alligator had been lying in wait, using a hunting strategy perfected over millennia. The attack came without warning. The massive reptile launched from the brush with explosive force, its powerful tail propelling it through the water faster than Glenn could react. The alligator's jaws clamped onto Glenn's right leg with devastating precision. The initial bite crushed bone instantly, the sound audible to the greenskeeper from 50 yards away. What followed was the alligator's signature killing technique, the death roll. The spinning maneuver used to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh is one of nature's most efficient killing methods. Glenn was yanked off his feet and dragged into the deeper section of the pond. His evening walk transformed into a nightmare in seconds. The greenskeeper shouted and ran toward the water's edge, but the distance and his own safety concerns prevented any rescue attempt, so he phoned for help. He said he saw Glenn surface once, his arms thrashing, before the alligator's powerful jaws pulled him under for the final time. The entire struggle lasted less than 15 seconds. Emergency responders arrived within minutes of the 911 call, but the pond had already returned to its calm. Dive teams worked through the night, their underwater lights cutting through the murky water as they searched for Glenn's remains. Recovery divers located Glenn's body the following morning, wedged against the concrete drainage inlet where the current had carried him. The injuries were catastrophic. The alligator's initial bite had shattered his femur and caused massive blood loss, but the official cause of death was drowning. The predator responsible was captured hours later using baited hooks. Following standard protocol for alligators involved in human fatalities, it was euthanized by wildlife officers. The investigation revealed that Glenn had walked past multiple warning signs, stepped over barrier chains, and ignored verbal warnings from maintenance staff. The retention pond had been clearly marked as a wildlife zone, with signs posted in both English and Spanish warning of alligator danger. Some residents called for stricter penalties for ignoring closures, while others argued that extensive restrictions infringed on their freedom. But for those who knew Glenn personally, it was simply a tragic end to a familiar pattern. A stubborn man who believed rules were suggestions, until one proved fatal. It was March 9, 2018, as a violent storm swept through southern Scottsville. Wind rattling tin roofs and rain pooling in red clay yards. Behind a small house, a flashlight beam sliced through the dark toward a camouflage shed, where Kilo, a 350-pound Bengal tiger, waited silently as laughter from the garage faded into the storm. Within minutes, that laughter would transform into screams that would echo through the hollow. Elijah Brantley was a 29-year-old recluse whose journey from auto mechanic to exotic predator owner had been marked by increasing isolation and dangerous obsessions. Once employed at a small garage outside Bowling Green, he had slowly withdrawn from steady work after a back injury and a falling out with coworkers. Over the next 2 years, Elijah poured his time and dwindling money into a remote lifestyle, one where he could pursue what he called pure control. That mindset would take physical form in the shape of a steel-framed enclosure and a dangerous growing animal few in the area even knew existed. Elijah had constructed the enclosure in secret, a concrete-floored structure welded from scrap panels and wrapped in layers of camo tarps, brush, and plywood. Hidden behind a stand of cedars and positioned downhill from the house, it was all but invisible from the road and overlooked by local authorities. He had no exotic animal license, no fencing inspection, and no veterinary documentation for the tiger's health. The shed had no external signage, no perimeter fence, and no real emergency access. He fed Kilo raw meat, chicken quarters, ground beef, expired pork, obtained through bulk suppliers who likely never asked questions. Elijah believed that feeding the tiger regularly had earned him its trust. Sandy, Elijah's cousin, had once been close to him. She hadn't visited in over a year, but had reached out recently, concerned about his reclusive behavior and rumors from neighbors. That Friday night, she and her boyfriend Drew came to see him, under the pretense of a family check-in, though really it was part intervention, part curiosity. They sat in the garage drinking cheap beer while lightning cracked over the ridge. The metal roof shook with wind gusts and water pooled around the tires of Drew's truck. Around 9:15 p.m., after a lull in the storm, Elijah stood up with a grin and asked if they wanted to see something insane. His tone was casual and joking. Neither Sandy nor Drew realized the seriousness of what he meant. Elijah retrieved a flashlight, zipped up his jacket, and motioned for them to follow. They stepped outside into the mud and walked around the back of the house, their shoes slipping in puddles and wet leaves. The flashlight cut across trees and brush until the beam landed on a sagging tarp that covered what looked like a shed. Kilo was already awake and pacing, the sound of boots in the mud and voices in the dark alerting his predatory instincts. Bengal tigers are apex predators, solitary hunters capable of bringing down animals many times their own size. Males can weigh up to 660 pounds and measure over 10 feet from nose to tail. Their retractable claws can extend over 4 inches, and their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they ambush prey from cover, targeting the neck with a single powerful bite to sever the spinal cord and cause instant death. In captivity, those instincts remain intact, triggered by movement, scent, and opportunity. As Elijah stepped through the unlatched door of the enclosure, he crossed a line that had never truly existed in Kilo's mind. The tiger did not see a caretaker. It saw a moving shape inside its domain, presenting no visible threat. There was no warning growl, no pawing or hesitation. Kilo lunged from the side of the enclosure, his body hitting Elijah with crushing impact. Elijah landed hard on the concrete, his flashlight skittering out of reach. What happened next unfolded in seconds. Kilo's jaws locked onto Elijah's neck with devastating force, the bite crushing vertebrae and severing critical arteries. Sandy screamed. Drew grabbed a rusted crowbar from beside the shed and struck the cage bars, yelling. Kilo paid no attention. The tiger shook Elijah's body, dragging him toward the far end of the shed, where blood quickly pooled under his hind legs. Kilo began feeding, methodically, silently. He tore through fabric and flesh, exposing muscle and ribs. Sandy, panicked, ran back toward the house to get her phone, slipping twice in the mud. Drew remained outside the shed, shouting Elijah's name, unable to look away. Elijah was unresponsive within the first 30 seconds. He was likely dead within a minute. Sandy's 911 call was logged at 9:27 p.m. It took over 20 minutes for law enforcement and wildlife officials to reach the property, slowed by weather and poor road conditions. When officers arrived, Kilo was still crouched over Elijah's remains, showing signs of possession and guarding behavior, ears back, eyes fixed, tail rigid. One wildlife officer prepared a tranquilizer dart, while another took position behind the patrol vehicle. A single dart was fired and struck Kilo in the hindquarter. The tiger growled, backed away slowly, and collapsed under sedation within 3 minutes. The scene that investigators entered was gruesome. Elijah's face was torn beyond recognition. His neck was broken, and his chest cavity had been partially opened. Blood had seeped into the cracks on the concrete floor. Clothing, bone fragments, and shredded meat were scattered in a 6-foot radius. Elijah's funeral was held 5 days later at a private cemetery near Bowling Green. Only a small group of family attended. No obituary was published, and no formal service was conducted. His casket remained closed. The family declined interviews and asked that the details remain private. The Tiger Kilo was transferred under sedation to a secure holding facility that night. After a brief observation period, he was relocated to a licensed big cat sanctuary in the western United States. Authorities opened an investigation into how Elijah had acquired and kept the animal, but found no records, receipts, or permits. Without clear violations involving commerce or transportation, no charges were filed posthumously. The shed was dismantled within a week. The land was quietly listed for sale by Elijah's estate. There was no local press coverage beyond an initial police blotter entry. State officials issued a public advisory about exotic animal ownership, but stopped short of passing new restrictions. The morning of November 18, 2017 brought perfect conditions to the deep waters 45 miles southeast of Key Largo, Florida. The sun blazed overhead in the cloudless sky, its rays penetrating the crystal clear water to depths that made the ocean floor visible even from the surface. For Marcus Thompson, 39, preparing his gear on the deck of his friend's 28-foot boat, it looked like the perfect day to pursue the large pelagic fish that inhabited the deep blue waters of the Florida Straits. Marcus embodied the rugged independence that characterized serious spear fishermen. His weathered face and permanent tan told the story of 15 years spent pursuing fish in some of Florida's most challenging waters. From the shallow flats of the Everglades to the deep blue waters where the Gulf Stream carried both opportunity and danger. Marcus approached spearfishing with the same methodical precision he brought to engine repair. Friends often joke that Marcus treated his spearfishing gear better than his truck, but they also acknowledged that his attention to detail had kept him safe during thousands of dives in challenging conditions. The trip that November morning was meant to be a relaxing weekend adventure with two close friends, both experienced divers who shared Marcus's passion for deep water hunting. The area they chose was known for its abundant marine life, but also for the strong currents that could separate divers from their boat if they weren't careful. At 1:30 p.m., the three friends began their diving rotation, with one person staying on the boat while two dove together, following the buddy system that had kept them safe during years of deep water hunting. The current was stronger than expected, but not dangerous for experienced divers who understood how to work with the water rather than fighting against it. Marcus made several successful dives during the first hour, bringing up smaller fish while scouting for the large amberjack that was the day's primary target. Then he finally spotted a massive amberjack cruising near a coral head in 180 feet of water. His shot was perfect, but the wounded amberjack, instead of dying quickly, began a powerful run that created exactly the kind of blood trail that could attract predators from considerable distances. What Marcus didn't know was that a large bull shark had been patrolling the area, drawn by the abundant bait fish that congregated around the underwater structure. Bull sharks, unlike their oceanic cousins, are comfortable in both shallow and deep waters. And this 9-foot female had been hunting in the area for several days. The blood trail from Marcus's speared fish triggered every predatory instinct the shark possessed. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous shark species to humans, not because of their size, but because of their aggressive nature and their tendency to inhabit the same waters where people fish and dive. These stocky predators possess powerful jaws filled with triangular teeth designed for grabbing and tearing prey. And and their broad, flat snouts are packed with sensory organs that make them incredibly effective hunters in murky or deep water. Marcus was at a depth of 40 feet, ascending with his catch, when the bull shark struck. The attack came from his blind spot, the predator having approached from below and behind, while Marcus focused on controlling his struggling catch. The shark's jaws clamped down on Marcus's thigh with crushing force, its teeth penetrating deep into muscle and severing the femoral artery. The bull shark, having delivered what was likely an investigative bite, released him and began circling, attracted by the increasing amount of blood in the water. Marcus knew he was in mortal danger and began swimming desperately toward the surface, but he was already going into shock from massive blood loss. Tony and Rick, watching from the boat, saw the blood cloud expanding in the clear water and immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. They could see Marcus ascending rapidly, trailing blood, with a large shark circling below him. Tony jumped into the water with a bang stick, while Rick started the engines and maneuvered the boat toward Marcus's position. Marcus broke the surface 40 yards from the boat, gasping for air and calling weakly for help. The bull shark had followed him to the surface and was becoming increasingly aggressive, attracted by the massive amount of blood Marcus was losing. Tony reached Marcus first, using the bang stick to drive the shark away, while Rick brought the boat alongside. They pulled Marcus from the water, but the damage was already done. The bull shark's bite had severed his femoral artery, and despite their desperate attempts to control the bleeding with tourniquets and pressure bandages, Marcus had lost too much blood. He remained conscious long enough to tell his friends he loved them, then lost consciousness as they raced toward shore. Marcus Thompson died from massive blood loss before they could reach the marina, becoming another tragic reminder of the risks inherent in deep water spearfishing. The incident led to enhanced safety recommendations for spearfishermen, including the use of shark shields, improved first aid training focused on arterial bleeding, and better communication equipment for emergency situations. But perhaps most importantly, it reinforced the critical need for the buddy system and immediate surfacing after spearing fish in deep water. September 14, 2020 brought oppressive humidity and threatening skies to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, as the remnants of Hurricane Laura continued to dump torrential rain across the region. The storm had passed through 2 days earlier, leaving behind flooded streets and standing water that transformed familiar landscapes into temporary wetlands where dangerous wildlife could appear in unexpected places. Coach Darnell Price was a 51-year-old PE teacher who had become a beloved institution at Magnolia Elementary School over his 25-year career. Standing 6 feet tall with a booming laugh that could be heard across the playground, Coach Price was known throughout the school district for his unwavering dedication to his students and his ability to make even the most reluctant children excited about physical activity. The week following Hurricane Laura had been challenging for everyone at Magnolia Elementary. The school had been closed for 2 days while maintenance crews cleared debris and ensured the building was safe. When classes finally resumed on Thursday, the children were restless and eager to burn off energy after being cooped up indoors. The decision to allow outdoor recess on Friday morning was not made lightly. Principal Martinez had consulted with maintenance staff and personally inspected the playground area before giving approval. The rain had finally stopped, and while the ground remained soggy with puddles in low-lying areas, the playground equipment appeared safe, and the children desperately needed the opportunity to play outside. What school officials didn't fully appreciate was the extent to which the flooding had displaced wildlife throughout the region. The storm surge and heavy rainfall had inundated vast areas of wetland habitat, forcing alligators and other semi-aquatic species to seek higher ground and new territory. American alligators are perfectly adapted to Louisiana's wetland environment and are among the most powerful predators in North America. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds. Their jaws can exert a crushing force of over 3,000 pounds per square inch, one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom. Alligators can remain motionless for hours, appearing like logs, before exploding into action at speeds of up to 25 miles per hour on land. During flood conditions, they become displaced from familiar territory and may be more aggressive as they compete for new resources. What the children and school staff didn't know was that a mature male, approximately 8.5 feet long and weighing close to 400 pounds, was within the proximity of the school. He had been displaced from his normal habitat 3 miles from the school and had spent 2 days navigating flooded drainage systems. The school's location in a slight depression, combined with the playground's proximity to a storm drain outlet, had made it an attractive resting spot. As the children poured onto the playground that Friday morning, their excitement was infectious. Coach Price positioned himself in the center where he could maintain visual contact with all activity zones: the swings, climbing structure, basketball court, and open field. The playground had been inspected by maintenance staff, but the inspection had focused on structural damage and debris removal rather than wildlife concerns. The alligator had likely been present for several hours before being discovered, having taken refuge in a shallow, muddy depression near the large slide during pre-dawn hours when the area was deserted. His natural camouflage and motionless behavior had made him virtually invisible to casual observation, and the muddy conditions provided perfect concealment. It was while Coach Price was helping kindergartners organize a game of tag that he noticed something unusual near the slide. What he initially took to be a fallen log was positioned in a way that seemed inconsistent with cleanup efforts. As Coach Price moved closer to investigate, he began to realize that what he was looking at was not debris at all. The shape was too organic, and as he watched more carefully, he detected the slight rise and fall that indicated breathing. The realization that he was looking at a large alligator hit him just as a group of second graders came running toward the slide area. The next few seconds unfolded with heightened awareness that accompanies moments of extreme crisis. Coach Price understood immediately that children's lives were in immediate danger, and that his response would determine whether this day ended in tragedy. The alligator, perhaps startled by the approaching children or simply reacting to movement, suddenly came to life with explosive power. Its massive jaws opened as it oriented toward the group of 7-year-olds who were completely unaware of the danger. Coach Price didn't hesitate. He charged forward with remarkable speed for a man his age, reaching the children just as the alligator was beginning its lunge. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the nearest child and threw her backward to safety, but his heroic action put him directly in the predator's path. The massive reptile's jaws, capable of crushing a bowling ball, clamped down on his right leg just below the knee with devastating force. The 3,000-pound bite pressure immediately shattering bone and tearing through muscle as the alligator began its characteristic death roll. The school's emergency protocols proved effective under these extreme circumstances. Within 2 minutes, additional staff had arrived, emergency services had been called, and the school was placed on lockdown. The alligator maintained its grip for approximately 4 minutes before wildlife officers arrived with specialized equipment. The animal was successfully tranquilized and removed, allowing emergency medical personnel to begin treating Coach Price's injuries. Coach Price was transported to Our Lady of the Lake Regional Medical Center, where trauma surgeons worked for over 6 hours to save his leg. The powerful jaws had crushed bone, severed muscles, and damaged blood vessels, requiring multiple surgical procedures and medical hardware to stabilize the fractures. While Coach Price survived the attack, the damage to his leg was permanent and life-changing. Despite multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, he never regained full mobility. The injury effectively ended his career as a physical education teacher, as he could no longer demonstrate activities or maintain the level of physical engagement that had defined his teaching style. However, the impact of his heroic actions extended far beyond his personal sacrifice. Emma, the child he had saved, suffered no physical injuries and returned to normal activities within days. The incident prompted immediate and comprehensive changes in school safety protocols throughout Louisiana, including specialized wildlife fencing and mandatory wildlife inspections after major storms. Coach Price's story became a powerful example of selfless dedication that defines the best educators. Despite his physical limitations, he remained connected to Magnolia Elementary as a volunteer and mentor. The school's gymnasium was renamed in his honor, and his photograph was prominently displayed with a plaque recognizing his heroism. The alligator responsible for the attack was relocated to a wildlife preserve after being determined to be in good health and exhibiting normal behavior patterns. Wildlife biologists noted that the animal's presence on the playground was entirely consistent with post-storm displacement patterns and did not indicate any unusual aggression or abnormal behavior. It was November 16, 2013, the Wyoming wind slicing across the plains near Cody as a Barbary lion paced behind rusted bars in a half-acre of makeshift enclosures. Just past noon, Derek Pruitt stepped through the gate carrying a tray of raw venison, unaware that his years of reckless confidence were about to meet their violent end. Derek Pruitt was a 38-year-old former rodeo star whose fearless reputation on the bronc riding circuit had been built on calculated risk and split-second timing. When a career-ending injury forced his retirement, he channeled that same dangerous confidence into exotic animal ownership, converting old rodeo panels into enclosures on his property outside Cody. His centerpiece was Jax, a 500-pound Barbary lion he had acquired as a cub and raised to adulthood over 3 years. Barbary lions, extinct in the wild but still bred in captivity, are apex predators weighing up to 550 pounds. With 2-inch claws, a 650 psi bite, and hunting instincts that remain sharp even when hand-raised. As males mature, they grow more territorial, powerful, and dangerously unpredictable. Derek's approach to lion handling was built on dangerous misconceptions. His philosophy centered on dominance through calmness, believing that lions could sense human emotions and respond to confidence with submission. He regularly entered Jax's enclosure without protective barriers, hand-feeding the massive predator and walking the perimeter with nothing but a stick for protection. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Jax had been exhibiting classic stress behaviors, pacing at odd hours, refusing food for days, showing increased agitation during routine interactions. These behavioral changes are common in captive lions experiencing hormonal fluctuations or territorial stress, often preceding aggressive episodes. But Derek dismissed these red flags as winter laziness, his overconfidence blinding him to the danger signals that any trained animal behaviorist would have recognized immediately. On Thanksgiving weekend, his 14-year-old nephew Bryce had come by to help with feeding, as he often did. The enclosure's safety vestibule meant to protect direct contact was bypassed as always. Derek insisted Jax knew him too well to ever pose a threat. At 12:04 p.m., Derek entered the lion's pen carrying venison quarters. The lion lay still in the corner, watching. Derek called his usual greeting and turned his back to approach the feeding platform. That single act, turning away, was all it took. Without a sound, Jax rose and closed the distance in 2 strides. He struck with blinding speed, raking his forepaws across Derek's back and slamming him to the ground. Bryce screamed, frozen just outside the fence, as Jax clamped his jaws around Derek's neck and shook violently. The lion's bite, designed to crush windpipes and snap vertebrae, did exactly that. Derek kicked weakly for a few seconds, but Jax remained locked in, eyes fixed, unmoving. The animal's instincts had overtaken years of hand-rearing and familiarity. Bryce grabbed a metal rake and shouted, striking the bars. Jax didn't flinch. The 911 call came at 12:07 p.m. Bryce, voice shaking, told the dispatcher about the incident. When deputies arrived at 12:18, Jax was still hovering over Derek's mangled body. Officers fired a single shot, killing the lion instantly. Derek was pronounced dead on scene. His injuries matched a classic big cat takedown. Crushed cervical vertebrae, deep claw marks across his spine, and puncture wounds through the throat. The untouched tray of venison nearby made one thing clear: Jax hadn't attacked for food. He had responded to instinct. Territorial, sudden, and final. A small funeral was held on the outskirts of Amarillo, attended by a few family members, 2 former rodeo friends, and a wildlife officer who had known Derek from inspection visits. There were no speeches, just silence, wind, and a closed casket. Bryce received trauma counseling. Derek's remaining animals were relocated, and the enclosure was dismantled within weeks. State officials quietly tightened exotic animal ownership regulations, closing the loopholes Derek had exploited. The morning of August 14, 2014 dawned with deceptive beauty at Ponce Inlet, Florida. The sky blazed with streaks of orange and pink as the sun climbed above the Atlantic horizon, painting the water in brilliant hues that made the ocean look like liquid fire. For Tyler Brooks, 28, watching the conditions from his apartment window just 2 blocks from the beach, it looked like the perfect start to what he hoped would be an epic dawn session. Tyler embodied everything people imagined when they thought of a Florida surfer. Sun-bleached hair that never seemed to need styling, a perpetual tan that spoke of countless hours in the water, and an easy smile that made them instantly likable to customers at the surf shop where he worked. He had been riding waves along Florida's coast for 12 years, ever since his family moved to New Smyrna Beach when he was 16. What started as a way to fit in at a new school had become his passion, his profession, and his identity. Ponce Inlet had been Tyler's regular morning spot for the past 3 years. The break offered consistent waves and was usually uncrowded during the early hours. Exactly what Tyler preferred for his pre-work sessions. What Tyler didn't fully appreciate, despite his years of experience, was how dramatically overnight storms could change the ocean's character. The previous evening had brought heavy rains and strong winds that stirred up sediment and debris, creating the murky water conditions that made Ponce Inlet particularly dangerous. The storm had also driven massive schools of baitfish into the shallow waters near the inlet, creating a feeding frenzy that attracted predators from the deeper offshore waters. At 6:30 a.m., Tyler paddled out into conditions that looked perfect from shore, but told a different story once he was in the water. The visibility was severely limited. The water had a greenish-brown tint that spoke of stirred-up sediment and organic matter, exactly the kind of conditions that made it difficult for both surfers and sharks to distinguish between different objects in the water. For nearly an hour, Tyler enjoyed what felt like a private surf session. The waves were clean and consistent, breaking with the kind of power and shape that made all the early morning effort worthwhile. He caught wave after wave, each ride reinforcing his decision to brave the murky conditions. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning haze and warming the air, creating the perfect Florida morning that locals treasured and tourists paid thousands to experience. But unbeknownst to him, a bull shark had been tracking his movements. A 7-foot female, drawn to the area by the abundance of baitfish and the vibrations created by Tyler's surfboard cutting through the water. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous species to humans, not because they're the largest or most aggressive, but because they frequent the same shallow, murky waters where people swim and surf. The attack came without warning. Tyler felt a sudden crushing pressure around his left leg below the knee, followed immediately by searing pain that shot through his entire body. The shark's teeth, designed for gripping and tearing, penetrated deep into his calf muscle, severing the major artery and crushing bone. Tyler's scream echoed across the water as he instinctively began paddling toward shore, his surfboard becoming a life raft in his desperate attempt to escape. Despite his desperate paddling toward shore, Tyler was already going into shock from massive blood loss. Early morning beachgoers, including several joggers and dog walkers, heard Tyler's screams and immediately dialed 911. The Volusia County Beach Patrol, experienced in water rescues and shark attack responses, launched their rescue watercraft within 4 minutes of receiving the emergency call. But by the time lifeguards reached Tyler in waist-deep water, he had already lost consciousness from blood loss and was floating face down next to his surfboard. The rescue team pulled Tyler from the water and immediately began emergency medical treatment on the beach. Despite their quick response and professional medical care, he never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead 20 minutes later at Halifax Health Medical Center. The attack prompted immediate changes to beach safety protocols in Volusia County. Enhanced dawn patrol warnings were implemented, with lifeguards beginning their shifts earlier to monitor conditions during the popular early morning surf sessions. Emergency response procedures were also improved, with additional rescue equipment positioned at high-risk locations and faster communication systems installed to reduce response times. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.